My wife, the CEO, announced, "I want a prenup. I'm not risking my future on you." I nodded, smart thinking. Then I had my lawyer draft one that protected everything I'd built. Her lawyers called when they realized I had 10 times more assets than she did. So there I was, Marcus Hale, 34 years old and supposedly living the dream, sitting across from my fiancée, Cassandra, at some bougie rooftop restaurant that charged $23 for what they called artisan bread. But what I recognized is literally just toast with butter and some fancy salt sprinkled on top. The kind of place where the waiters wear vests that cost more than my monthly car payment. And they describe every dish like it's a Netflix documentary. You know, the type where ordering a steak requires a PhD in culinary pretentiousness. And asking for ketchup gets you looks like you just announced you're voting for the other guy. The view was admittedly gorgeous. I'll give them that. The city lights sparkled below us like someone had dumped a jewelry box across the skyline. And there was this violinist wandering between tables playing something classical that I'm sure was culturally significant, but honestly just sounded like fancy background music for rich people to ignore while they Instagrammed their truffle fries. Cassandra had picked this place naturally because she picked everything these days. Where we ate, where we vacationed, which shade of beige our future kitchen cabinets would be, all her calls, all the time. She looked absolutely stunning that night. Don't get me wrong. Her dark hair was pulled back in one of those effortlessly elegant styles that probably took 45 minutes and 3 YouTube tutorials to achieve. And she wore this emerald green dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. The candlelight was doing that thing where it made her skin glow like she was lit by a professional cinematographer. And I remember thinking, yeah, okay, universe. I get it. She's gorgeous. Point taken. I'd assumed we were there to celebrate. Her tech company had just gone public. IPO day, baby. And the stock had opened strong enough to make her personal shares worth something in the holy crap range of numbers. She'd been riding high all week, texting me screenshots of financial news articles with her company's name in bold, forwarding me congratulatory emails from investors and venture capitalists. Basically doing everything except hiring a sky rider to announce her success. Not that I blamed her, really. She'd worked her tail off for this, pulling 80-hour weeks, living on cold brew coffee, and whatever counted as food in Silicon Valley these days. She'd earned her moment. So, when she reached across the table and took my hand with that smile, the one that usually preceded either really good news or really expensive purchases, I figured she was about to suggest we upgrade the honeymoon from Cabo to the Maldives, or maybe finally pull the trigger on that Tesla she'd been eyeing. I was mentally preparing my yes, dear face, maybe planning how I'd pretend to be excited about spending 2 weeks at a resort where the Wi-Fi was probably garbage. Instead, Cassandra squeezed my fingers. Looked me dead in the eyes with the kind of serious expression usually reserved for cancer diagnosis or reveal that someone's been eating your leftover Chinese food and said, "Marcus, I want a prenup. I'm not risking my future on you. I'm not even kidding." I literally almost choked on the breadstick I'd been chewing. Like full-on sitcom-style choking. The kind where you're coughing and your eyes are watering and you're trying not to spray crumbs across the table like some kind of carb-loaded sprinkler system. The couple at the next table glanced over with that mix of concern and judgment that people reserve for public displays of mortality. I grabbed my water glass and took a gulp, buying myself maybe 10 seconds to process what had just come out of my fiancée's mouth. A prenup. She wanted a prenuptial agreement at our celebratory dinner with the violinist literally standing 6 feet away playing something that was probably supposed to be romantic but now felt like the soundtrack to a murder mystery. Now, here's the thing. I wasn't mad. I really wasn't. In fact, part of me wanted to laugh, which probably sounds insane, but stick with me here. See, Cassandra thought she was being the smart one, the practical one, the financially savvy tech executive protecting her newly minted fortune from her humble software consultant boyfriend who fixed bugs for startups and drove a beat-up SUV that made concerning noises whenever I turned left. She thought she was making a bold, independent woman move, the kind her business school professors would have applauded. What she didn't know, what nobody knew except my lawyer and my accountant and possibly my mother, though she might have forgotten because she also forgets my birthday half the time, was that I was worth significantly more than her. Like significantly, but we'll get to that later. I set down my water glass, wiped my mouth with the fancy cloth napkin that was probably going to be laundered by hand in blessed mountain spring water or whatever, and smiled at her. Not a fake smile, either. A genuine amused "oh honey, you have no idea what's about to happen" kind of smile. Smart thinking, I said, keeping my tone light and agreeable like she just suggested we get appetizers. Really, Cass? That's actually brilliant. Protecting your assets, thinking long term, being practical about the business side of marriage. Very mature. She blinked at me like I just complimented her on correctly identifying what color the sky was. Confusion flickered across her face for maybe half a second. I guess she'd expected pushback, maybe some wounded pride, or at least a request to discuss it later when there wasn't a violinist hovering nearby like a tuxedoed ghost. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Instead, I raised my wine glass, a pen noir that the sommelier had recommended with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts, and offered a toast to protecting assets. We clearly don't have the same amount of, I said cheerfully, clinking my glass against hers before she could fully process the implications of that statement. She laughed, but it was that uncertain laugh people do when they're not entirely sure if something's funny or if they're missing the joke. Spoiler alert, she was absolutely missing the joke. The joke was flying over her head at approximately Mach 3, trailing smoke and doing loop-loops while she sat there thinking she'd just pulled off some big power move. The rest of dinner was surreal. Cassandra launched into this detailed explanation about how her legal team, because of course she already had a legal team assembled, like she was planning a corporate merger instead of a marriage, had drafted a preliminary agreement. She used phrases like spousal financial limitations and asset protection protocols and liability containment. Basically turning our upcoming marriage into something that sounded like a business acquisition with slightly better catering. I nodded along, making appropriate sounds while mentally composing a text message to my own lawyer, Gina Rowe, who I'd been working with for years and who had the kind of sharp legal mind that could find loopholes in the 10 Commandments. Gina was going to absolutely lose her mind when I told her about this. She'd been waiting for Cassandra to show her true colors for months now, dropping hints like, "Your girlfriend seems very interested in your financial planning, and has she asked to see your tax returns yet?" The moment we left the restaurant, after Cassandra insisted on paying with her company credit card, naturally making a big show of it like she was establishing dominance through overprick base, I pulled out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. Cash just asked for a prenup. Game on. Gina's response came back before I'd even made it to my car. Finally. Been waiting for this one. My office tomorrow 9 a.m. Bring coffee and your sense of humor. We're going to need both. I sat in my beat-up SUV in the restaurant parking lot. The valet had given it a look like I'd asked him to park a diseased llama and just smiled. Cassandra's Tesla was already pulling out onto the street, her tail lights disappearing into downtown traffic, probably heading back to her penthouse to call her friends and brag about how she'd handled the prenup conversation like a boss babe. The game had begun. All right. She'd just started a chess match without realizing I'd been playing three-dimensional chess the entire time. But hey, I'd let her enjoy her victory lap for now. After all, the best plot twists come when people think they've already figured out the ending. I started my SUV. It made that concerning grinding noise again. Really needed to get that checked and headed home to my modest little condo with my modest little life. Already planning my next move. Tomorrow morning, Gina and I were going to draft a prenup of our own. Only ours was going to have some very interesting clauses that I had a feeling Cassandra wasn't going to see coming. This was going to be fun. Here's the thing about perception versus reality. Most people only see what you want them to see, and I'd become a freaking Jedi master at controlling that narrative. To everyone in my life, including Cassandra and her entire circle of power-suited, kombucha drinking, TED Talk watching friends, I was just Marcus Hale, the reliable but ultimately unremarkable software consultant who fixed code for startups and lived a comfortable but decidedly average existence. You know, the type. Shows up to work in jeans and a hoodie, orders the same turkey club for lunch 3 times a week, drives a vehicle that's held together by duct tape and prayer. The kind of guy who blends into the background at parties while more interesting people talk about their vacations to Croatia. They saw a guy who made decent money. Sure, enough to split fancy dinners and contribute to a wedding fund without crying into his bank statement, but nothing spectacular. Nothing that would make anyone sit up and take notice or suddenly develop opinions about how I should invest or what I should be driving or whether I'd consider diversifying my portfolio. I was financially comfortable in the most boring middle-class way possible, like a human equivalent of a Toyota Camry. Reliable, functional, completely forgettable. What Cassandra didn't know, what literally nobody except my lawyer, Gina, my accountant, Harold, and probably the IRS knew, was that 3 years ago, I'd quietly sold a piece of software that I'd built in my spare time for $18.6 million. And yeah, you read that right, $18.60, $6 million plus royalties that kept rolling in every quarter like clockwork, adding a nice little bonus to my bank account that would make most people's annual salary look like tip money. The software was a cloud-based AI system for logistics management. Basically a really smart tool that helped companies figure out the most efficient ways to move products from point A to point B while saving money and reducing their carbon footprint and making their supply chain managers look like geniuses. I'd started building it about 6 years ago when I was working for a mid-sized tech company and got frustrated with how clunky and outdated all the existing logistics software was. It was like watching someone try to run a marathon in wooden clogs. Technically possible, but painfully inefficient and just sad to witness. So, I did what any self-respecting engineer with too much time and too much coffee does. I built something better. Nights, weekends, lunch breaks, those weird hours between 2 and 5 a.m. when you can't sleep and your brain decides it's the perfect time to solve complex algorithmic problems. I coded and tested and refined, living off energy drinks and the kind of takeout food that arrives in styrofoam containers with mysterious sauces. My friends thought I was going through some kind of quarter-life crisis. My mom thought I needed a girlfriend. Nobody realized I was building something that would eventually change my life completely. The beauty of the system was that it was genuinely useful. Within 6 months of soft launching it, half the startups in the city were using it. Within a year, I had clients in 15 states. Within 18 months, a major investment firm came knocking with an offer that made my hands shake when I read the number. They wanted to buy it outright, integrate it into their portfolio of business solutions, and pay me not just a massive lump sum, but also ongoing royalties based on usage and licensing. I remember sitting in that conference room with their acquisition team, all of them in suits that cost more than my rent, and thinking, holy hell, this is actually happening. My lawyer, Gino, was there, of course, negotiating terms like a boss and making sure I didn't accidentally sign away my firstborn or agree to anything stupid. When we finally shook hands and signed the paperwork, I walked out of that building a legitimately wealthy man. Not I can afford a nicer apartment, wealthy, but I could retire tomorrow and live comfortably for the rest of my life. Wealthy. And then I did something that apparently nobody does when they suddenly come into money. I kept my mouth shut and my lifestyle exactly the same. I didn't buy a Porsche or a pin house or start wearing watches that cost more than college tuition. I didn't suddenly develop a taste for caviar or feel the need to vacation in places where you need a passport and a translator. I stayed in my modest 2-bedroom condo in a perfectly average neighborhood where the biggest drama was usually someone leaving their garbage cans out too long. I kept driving my beat-up SUV that made alarming noises and had a mysterious stain on the back seat that I'd stopped trying to identify. I still bought my coffee at the regular coffee shop instead of the pretentious one with the foam art. And I still wore the same jeans and t-shirts I'd been wearing since college because honestly, why the hell not? Here's what I'd learned from watching other people come into money. The moment everyone knows you have it, your life becomes exponentially more complicated. Suddenly, you've got long-lost cousins remembering your birthday, friends with amazing investment opportunities that sound suspiciously like pyramid schemes and romantic partners who are suddenly very interested in discussing your financial future together. Money doesn't just change your bank account. It changes how everyone around you behaves, and not usually in good ways. The last time someone had found out I had any significant amount of money, this was years ago before the big sale, when I'd made a decent bonus from a consulting gig, they'd suddenly become allergic to splitting the bill. Every dinner became this awkward dance of, oh no, you get this one, followed by them never ever reaching for their wallet again. They'd gotten weird about it, entitled almost like my slightly larger bank balance meant I was now the designated patron saint of picking up tabs. It was exhausting and irritating and it killed the friendship faster than you could say Venmo request. So when the big money came through, I made a conscious decision to keep living like regular Marcus, the forgettable software guy who was doing okay, but nothing spectacular. I took on occasional consulting gigs to maintain the appearance of needing to work. Showed up to meetings with my old laptop that had stickers from conferences nobody remembered and generally played the part of a guy who was comfortable but not wealthy. And it worked beautifully. Cassandra absolutely loved being the successful one in our relationship. It fed something in her ego that I didn't fully understand but was happy to accommodate because honestly it made my life easier. She paid for the fancy dinners and bragged to her friends about her hotshot career and treated me like her charming but financially inferior partner. The guy who was successful enough to not be embarrassing but not so successful that he threatened her position as the alpha earner. I was her safe, supportive, slightly beneath her boyfriend. And she wore that dynamic like a designer handbag. I let her have it. Why? Because watching someone underestimate you is actually kind of hilarious. And also because I genuinely didn't need the spotlight. Let her have her moment. Let her feel like the boss. I was perfectly content being underestimated, living my quiet life, making my quiet money, and not having to deal with the circus that comes with everyone knowing your net worth. But then her prenup arrived in my inbox, forwarded from her lawyer's office with a subject line that read, Premarital Agreement. Review and response requested. I opened it during my lunch break, sitting at my desk with a sandwich that I'd made at home, because spending $12 on lunch seemed wasteful, even with millions in the bank, and started reading through the clauses. No alimony, return the engagement ring if the marriage dissolves within 5 years. Spousal financial limits on joint accounts, separate property designations, liability waivers. It read less like a marriage agreement and more like a corporate contract designed to protect a company from a hostile takeover. Every clause basically screamed, I have money and you don't, so let's make sure you can't touch mine. I laughed so hard that coffee came out my nose, legitimately shot out like a caffeinated geyser, spraying across my keyboard, and making my coworker in the next cubicle ask if I was okay. I was more than okay. I was delighted. This was the most entertainment I'd had in months. I forwarded the entire document to Gina with a simple message. She really did it. Thoughts? Her response came back within minutes and I could practically hear her cackling through the phone. Oh, sweetheart, this is Christmas morning. We're drafting 1, 2. Only ours will have fireworks, confetti, and a surprise ending that'll make her lawyer need therapy. Clear your schedule for tomorrow. We've got work to do. I sat back in my office chair, grinning like an idiot, watching my coworkers mill around, discussing their mundane problems, printer jams, meeting conflicts, whether the office therm was set too cold. None of them had any idea that the quiet guy in the corner cubicle was about to flip his entire relationship dynamic on its head. The game wasn't just beginning anymore. The pieces were in position, and Cassandra had just made the opening move in a chess match. She didn't realize she was already losing. Cassandra showed up at my condo that evening unannounced, which was pretty typical for her these days since she'd started treating my place like an extension of her own personal empire. I heard her heels clicking up the hallway before she even knocked. These sharp staccato sounds that announced her presence like a corporate drummer leading a parade of ambition and designer handbags. She had a key, of course, but she always knocked first, which I'd initially thought was respectful until I realized it was actually her way of giving me a 3-second warning to look appropriately grateful for her arrival. I opened the door to find her standing there in full boardroom regalia, despite it being 7:30 on a Wednesday night. She was wearing this tailored navy pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that must have required industrial strength product to achieve that level of perfection. And she was absolutely radiating the kind of confidence that comes from spending your day telling people what to do and having them actually do it. She also smelled incredible, some perfume that I'm pretty sure cost more than my car's current Blue Book value. Something with notes of jasmine and financial superiority. She kissed me on the cheek, a gesture that felt more like a queen acknowledging a loyal subject than a fiancé greeting her future husband, and breezed past me into my living room like she owned the place, which given the prenup she was proposing, she wanted to make very clear she didn't and never would. Marcus, she said, settling onto my couch with the kind of graceful efficiency that made everything look choreographed. I'm really glad you're being so mature about the prenup situation. A lot of men would have gotten defensive or emotional, but you're handling it with such grace. It's very attractive. Honestly, shows real emotional intelligence. I nodded along, playing my role perfectly. The understanding boyfriend who knew his place in the financial hierarchy. Well, you know me, I said, keeping my tone light and agreeable. I'm all about practical solutions and thinking long term. Marriage is a partnership, and partnerships need clear agreements. She smiled, genuinely smiled like I just passed some kind of test she'd been administering without telling me. Exactly. That's exactly what I told my team. I said, Marcus gets it. He understands that this is just good business sense. You're not like other guys who get all weird about money and pride and masculinity. I sat down in the armchair across from her, the one with the slightly worn cushion that I'd been meaning to replace for about 2 years, but kept forgetting about because honestly, it was comfortable and I didn't care that it didn't match the rest of my furniture. Actually, I said, letting the word hang in the air for just a moment. I thought it was such a good idea that I asked my lawyer to prepare 1, 2. The change in her expression was subtle, but absolutely priceless. Her smile froze, not disappeared, just froze like someone had hit pause on a video right in the middle of an animation. Her perfectly groomed eyebrows, which probably required monthly maintenance appointments and specialized tools, drew together slightly in confusion. Wait, she said slowly, processing this information like a computer trying to run software it wasn't equipped for. You have a lawyer? Yeah, I said casually like I was mentioning that I had a dentist or a guy who fixed my plumbing when it got weird. Gina Rowe, I've been working with her for a few years now. She handles all my contract stuff, legal questions, boring paperwork things. She's fantastic, cheaper than therapy, and twice as fun to talk to. Cassandra laughed, but it was one of those laughs that people do when they're not entirely sure what's happening, but they want to seem like they're in on the joke. It came out a little forced, a little artificial, like artificial sweetener trying to pass as sugar. That's great, she said. And I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out why a simple software consultant would need a lawyer on retainer for contract stuff. So, you're drafting your own prenup, too? Well, Gina is, I clarified, being helpful. I'm not exactly fluent in legal jargon. I mostly just tell her what I want and she translates it into the kind of language that makes sense in court. She's really good at it. Went to Columbia Law, clerked for a federal judge, worked at one of those big Manhattan firms before deciding she preferred working with actual humans instead of corporate robots. We got connected through a mutual friend a few years back, and she's been invaluable ever since. I could see Cassandra trying to process this information, trying to fit it into her existing mental model of who I was and what my life looked like. In her mind, I was supposed to be the guy who maybe asked a buddy who knew a buddy who was in law school for advice, not someone who had an actual established attorney relationship with a Columbia-educated lawyer who'd worked at prestigious firms. It didn't compute with her narrative. That's very thorough of you, she finally said, recovering her composure with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms where showing confusion was basically admitting weakness. I mean, I'm sure your prenup will be fairly straightforward, just covering the basics. Oh, I'm sure. I agreed cheerfully. Gina is very thorough, though. She likes to make sure all the bases are covered, every detail accounted for. She actually got pretty excited when I told her about your prenup. Said something about how it was going to be fun to draft proper counterproposals. I think she likes the challenge, like a puzzle or a chess game. Cassandra's smile was getting tighter now, less genuine, more of a professional mask she was maintaining out of habit. Well, I'm sure our lawyers will work well together. Dalton, that's my attorney, is very experienced with these matters. He handles prenups for half the tech executives in the city. That's perfect. Then, I said, all sunshine and cooperation. Gina loves working with experienced attorneys. She says it makes everything go faster when everyone knows what they're doing. She mentioned we should probably do a full financial disclosure on both sides just to make sure everything's transparent and above board. Standard procedure, apparently. That word disclosure hung in the air between us like a smoke alarm that had just started beeping. I watched Cassandra's face carefully, saw the tiniest flicker of something that might have been concern or maybe just curiosity. She thought she knew everything about my financial situation because I'd been so carefully average in her presence, so consistently unimpressive in my displays of wealth. The idea that there might be something to disclose beyond software consultant makes decent salary probably seemed absurd to her. Of course, she said smoothly, already pulling out her phone, probably to text Dalton about this unexpected development. Transparency is important, although I imagine your disclosure will be pretty straightforward. Salary, savings, maybe a 401k. Dalton can have his paralegal whip up the standard forms. Probably. I agreed. Not correcting her adorable misconceptions. Gina said she'd have everything ready by next week. She's very efficient. I think you'll like her actually. She's got that same kind of direct, non-nonsense energy you have. Very professional, very sharp. Cassandra stayed for another 40 minutes during which she talked about her company's stock performance, an upcoming board meeting, and some corporate drama involving a VP who'd made the mistake of questioning her strategy in front of investors. I made the appropriate listening noises, asked the right questions, played the supportive partner role perfectly. The whole time though, I was mentally counting down the hours until my meeting with Gina tomorrow morning where we were going to craft a prenup that would make Cassandra's fancy lawyer earn whatever astronomical hourly rate he was charging. After she left, another cheek kiss, another cloud of expensive perfume, another reminder that she had an early meeting tomorrow, so she couldn't stay over. I immediately texted Gina. She has no idea. This is going to be spectacular. Her response was almost instantaneous. Already drafting, bringing my A game. We're adding full financial disclosure requirements, asset verification protocols, and a few fun clauses about good faith negotiations. If Madam CEO wants to play lawyer ball, we're bringing the entire legal league. Also, I'm putting in a clause about honesty in relationships just for the irony. I grinned at my phone like an idiot. Make it sparkle, I typed back. Oh, honey, she replied. I'm about to make it shine like a disco ball at a billionaire's wedding. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we're going to create a legal document so beautiful it should be in a museum. Also, bring good coffee. The stuff in my office tastes like filtered sadness. I spent the rest of the evening in a genuinely good mood, ordering pizza from my regular place. The one with the slightly greasy boxes and the guy at the counter who always gave me extra garlic knots and watching basketball highlights while my cat, Chairman Meow, yes, I named my cat Chairman Meow, Sumi judged me from his perch on the bookshelf. Cassandra thought she was playing chess, making strategic moves, protecting her assets like a good CEO. What she didn't realize was that she just walked into a game where she didn't even know all the pieces on the board. Tomorrow morning, Gina and I were going to change that. We were going to put all the pieces in plain view, spread them out on the table, and watch what happened when Cassandra realized that her slightly dorky, financially unremarkable fiancé was actually playing a completely different game than she thought. I couldn't wait. The law office was located in one of those downtown buildings that screamed. We charge by the minute and our coffee is imported. All glass and chrome and architectural angles that looked like someone had given MC Cher a blank check and told him to go crazy. The lobby had that polished marble floor that made your footsteps echo importantly, like every step you took was being documented for posterity, or at least for someone's Instagram story about power moves and professional success. The whole place smelled like expensive wood polish, fresh leather, and the kind of quiet money that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone already knows it's there. Gina had suggested we meet at Dalton's office as a courtesy, which I thought was hilarious because there was nothing courteous about what we were about to do. It was like a boxer suggesting you choose which ring you want to get knocked out in. Technically polite, ultimately irrelevant. She'd shown up at my place that morning in a sharp black suit that meant business. Carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it could survive a nuclear apocalypse and still have room for highlighters. And she'd been grinning like someone who'd just been told Christmas was coming early this year. Ready to ruin someone's whole narrative? She'd asked cheerfully while I locked my apartment door. Born ready, I'd replied, and I meant it. We arrived exactly on time. Gina was big on punctuality as a power move. Said it showed you respected everyone's time while also establishing that you were organized and professional, and were ushered into a conference room that looked like it had been designed specifically to intimidate people into settling. The table was this massive slab of dark wood that probably cost more than a decent used car, surrounded by leather chairs that made important creaking noises when you sat in them. And one entire wall was floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city that basically screamed, "Look how successful everyone in this room is." Cassandra was already there. Of course, because she'd probably arrived 15 minutes early to establish territorial dominance. She was wearing a white power suit that was so crisp and bright it could probably be seen from space. Paired with these killer heels that added 3 into her height and about 50 points to her intimidation factor. Her hair was pulled back in a style that said, "I woke up like this," but actually meant, "I woke up 2 hours early to look like this." And her makeup was flawless in that way that takes significant time and skill to achieve while appearing natural. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Fortune 500 cover shoot, which was probably the exact vibe she was going for. Her lawyer, Mr. Dalton, sat beside her, looking equally polished and approximately 3 times as smug. He was one of those silver-haired attorney types who probably played golf with judges on weekends and owned multiple vacation homes that he referred to as the place in Aspen or the Cape House. Like everyone just automatically knew which Cape he meant. His suit probably cost what I used to make in a month back in my actual struggling software consultant days. And he wore a watch that looked like it could fund a small nation's GDP. He had that expression that expensive lawyers get when they think they've already won. This sort of benevolent condescension, like a cat that's already caught the mouse and is just playing with it for entertainment value. "Marcus," Cassandra said warmly, standing to kiss my cheek in that performance of affection that I'd grown accustomed to. "Thank you for being so reasonable about all this. Mr. Dalton has prepared everything beautifully." "I'm sure he has," I said pleasantly, taking a seat across from them. Gina settled in beside me with the kind of calm confidence that made me want to high-five her. She set her briefcase on the table with a satisfying thud that said, "We're here and we mean business." Dalton cleared his throat importantly, the way people do when they're about to say something they think is significant. "Shall we begin with Ms. Reeves's financial disclosure? I think you'll find everything is quite in order." He slid a leather portfolio across the table toward us like he was presenting evidence at trial. "My client has been remarkably transparent about her assets." Gina opened the portfolio with the casual interest of someone browsing a restaurant menu, flipping through pages while I pretended to be fascinated by the view outside. The disclosure was thorough. I'll give them that. Cassandra's company shares, current valuation, her penthouse lease details, the loan on her Tesla, her investment accounts, her savings, everything laid out in neat columns with official letterheads and verification stamps. It was the financial equivalent of peacock feathers, all spread out for maximum impressive display. "Very comprehensive," Gina said approvingly, closing the portfolio. "My client appreciates the thoroughness. Mr. Dalton, you have an excellent reputation, and this work reflects that." Dalton actually pined a little, puffing up like he'd just been told his kid made honor roll. "Well, we do pride ourselves on attention to detail. I've handled prenuptial agreements for some of the most prominent executives in the city, and I believe in complete transparency as the foundation of any solid marital contract. Transparency, Gina repeated, nodding thoughtfully. Yes, that's so important. Which is exactly why we've prepared Mr. Hale's disclosure with the same level of detail. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a binder. Not a slim portfolio like Cassandra's, but an actual thick binder, the kind you'd use for a doctoral thesis or a comprehensive business plan. She set it on the table between us, and I swear to God, it made an audible thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly very quiet conference room. Here are Mr. Hale's financials, Gina said pleasantly, sliding the binder across the polished wood toward Dalton and Cassandra. As you'll see, we've been quite thorough. I watched Dalton's face as he opened the binder, and it was absolutely worth the price of admission to this whole circus. His expression went from smugly confident to confused to completely frozen in the span of about 4 seconds, which might be a record for emotional whiplash in legal proceedings. His eyes scanned the first page, then widened, then scanned again like he thought he might have misread something. The color drained from his face in a way that would have been concerning if it wasn't so entertaining. Cassandra leaned over to look, her perfectly manicured hand reaching out to turn the page, and I got to watch in real time as her brain tried to process what she was seeing. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land and wasn't quite sure how that had happened. The confident boardroom executive expression she'd been wearing like armor just crumbled. "Marcus," she said, and her voice came out weird, strangled, like she was trying to speak while someone was stepping on her throat. "You're worth 8 figures." I took a sip of the water that someone had helpfully placed at each seat, probably imported from some Norwegian glacier or filtered through diamonds or something equally ridiculous, and smiled. "Technically 9 if you count the royalties," I said casually, like we were discussing the weather or sports scores. "They've been performing really well lately. The Q3 numbers just came in and they were pretty solid." Dalton was flipping through pages now. His silver hair practically standing on end as he encountered document after document. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds I'd forgotten I owned, the original sale agreement for my software company, royalty statements, tax returns that would make most people's eyes water. Each page was meticulously documented, verified, notarized, and completely legitimate. Gina didn't mess around when it came to paperwork. This is quite extensive," Dalton stammered. And watching a lawyer who probably charged $800 an hour struggle to form coherent sentences was honestly therapeutic. "Mr. Hale, your financial position is significantly more robust than we were led to believe." "Nobody led you to believe anything," I pointed out reasonably. "You just assumed there's a difference." Cassandra was still staring at the binder like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics, and she was trying to decode some message from a lost civilization. Her face had gone through several color changes, from her normal healthy glow to pale to slightly flushed to a shade that I can only describe as, "Oh crap, I've made a terrible mistake." Her mascara, which had probably been applied with the precision of a surgeon this morning, was starting to smudge slightly at the corners where I'm pretty sure she was fighting back tears. Not sad tears, angry, frustrated, embarrassed tears. The kind you get when you realize you've completely misjudged a situation and there's an audience watching. "You deceived me," she said finally. And there was an edge to her voice that could have cut glass. "You've been lying this whole time about who you are, what you have. You let me think. I let you think what you wanted to think." I interrupted gently but firmly. "I never lied to you, Cass. Not once. You asked me what I did for a living. I told you. Software consultant. True. You asked if I own my condo. I said yes. Also true. You never asked if I had other assets or investments or income streams. You just assumed that what you saw was all there was." Gina jumped in. Her voice professional and crisp. "Mr. Hale has been completely forthcoming when asked direct questions. He simply chose not to volunteer information that wasn't requested. There's no legal or ethical violation there. In fact, I'd argue it shows remarkable restraint in an era where everyone feels compelled to broadcast their entire financial situation on social media." Dalton was regrouping now. Is lawyer brain kicking back into gear despite the shock? "We may need a moment to review these documents more thoroughly," he said, trying to salvage some professional dignity. "This changes the parameters of the prenuptial negotiation significantly." "Take all the time you need," I said generously, standing up and buttoning my jacket. Not a fancy jacket, just my regular one from a department store that had a sale, which now felt like an extra layer of irony. "We're not going anywhere. Well, actually, we're going to grab lunch, but we'll be back in an hour. There's a great taco place around the corner that does amazing carnitas." "Gina, you hungry? Starving?" Gina said, gathering up her things with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won the opening round of a championship match. I looked at Cassandra, who was still frozen in her chair, staring at the financial documents like they might spontaneously combust if she looked hard enough. "Oh, and Cass," I said, pausing at the door. "Remember what you said at dinner about not risking your future on me?" I smiled, keeping my tone light and friendly. "Yeah, I feel the same way. See you in an hour." We walked out of that conference room into the marble lobby. And the moment the elevator doors closed, Gina burst out laughing. Deep, genuine belly laughs that had her leaning against the elevator wall for support. "Did you see her face?" She gasped between laughs. "Did you see Dalton's face? I thought he was going to have a cardiac event right there in his own conference room." I grinned. "Worth every penny of your hourly rate. Honey," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "This one's on the house." That was pure entertainment. That night, my phone started blowing up around 8 p.m., which was honestly later than I'd expected. I figured Cassandra would start the text assault the moment she got back to her penthouse, probably around 6:30, but apparently it took her a solid 90 minutes to work herself up into the kind of rage that demanded immediate digital confrontation. I was sitting on my couch in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt that had more holes than Swiss cheese, eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container like a functional adult when my phone started vibrating so aggressively it nearly fell off the coffee table. The first text simply said, "Call me now." All caps on that "now." Which in text message language is basically the equivalent of someone kicking down your door and demanding attention. I took another bite of cold lane, chewed thoughtfully, and decided that I was comfortable right where I was. "Thank you very much." Chairman Meow was purring on the other end of the couch, completely unbothered by human drama, living his best life, and I figured I should take notes from his zen approach to conflict. The second text came 30 seconds later. "Marcus, we need to talk about what happened today." I wiped my hands on a napkin, not because I was going to respond, just because General So Sauce on phone screens is a pain to clean, and watched as the three little dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. She was typing, deleting, retyping, probably going through 17 different versions of whatever she wanted to say, trying to find the right combination of words that would make this situation make sense to her. The third text arrived, and it was a doozy. "You deceived me." I couldn't help it. I actually laughed out loud, startling Chairman Meow, who gave me a reproachful look that cats have perfected over thousands of years of judging humanity. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're absolutely completely in the right. "You said you wanted transparency." I just turned on the lights. I could practically feel the rage radiating through the phone screen from wherever she was. The response came back fast and furious. "You know that's not what I meant. You made me look like a fool." "How?" I typed back. GG, genuinely curious about her logic here. "By having money? By being successful? By not broadcasting my net worth on the first date? Please explain which part of having my life together makes you look foolish." The typing dots appeared and disappeared for a solid 2 minutes. I finished my lo mein, cracked open a beer. Nothing fancy, just regular domestic beer that came in a 6-pack from the grocery store, and waited. This was actually kind of entertaining in a train wreck sort of way, like watching a reality show where you know exactly how it's going to end, but you can't look away. Finally, her response came through, and it was long enough that it arrived in multiple texts. That thing that happens when someone is so worked up they don't realize they're writing a novel. "You embarrassed me in front of my lawyer. Do you have any idea how that looked? I brought him documentation of my success, my achievements, and then you show up with some massive binder like you were planning this ambush the whole time. Dalton called me after you left and he was shocked. He said in 20 years of practice, he's never seen such a discrepancy between perceived and actual financial positions." I sat back, took a swig of beer, and considered my response options. I could be mature and sympathetic, try to see things from her perspective, maybe offer some kind of olive branch that would smooth things over. Or I could be honest, which seemed like the more entertaining and ultimately more productive option. I went with honest. "Cassandra," I typed, "I didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed yourself. You assumed that because I don't drive a Porsche or wear a Rolex or live in a penthouse, I must not have money. That's on you. You wanted a prenup to protect your assets from me, like I was some kind of gold digger waiting to cash in. The only thing I did was show you that maybe you should have asked a few more questions before you made assumptions." The response was almost immediate. "You should have told me why." I shot back. "So you could treat me differently. So you could change how you acted around me? The whole reason I don't advertise my net worth is because money makes people weird. Case in point, this conversation." 3 minutes of silence. I could imagine her in her pristine penthouse with its minimalist furniture and city views, pacing around in whatever expensive loungewear rich people wear at home. Probably drinking wine from a glass that cost more than my couch, trying to figure out how to regain the upper hand in a situation where she definitively lost it. The next text was different in tone, less angry, more accusatory. You lied by omission. That's still lying. No, I replied. Lying is saying something untrue. I never said I was broke. I never said I struggled financially. I never claimed to be anything other than what I am. You created a story in your head about who I was based on superficial observations. And now you're mad that your story was wrong. That's not my problem. That's yours. My phone actually rang then, her name flashing on the screen with a photo of her from our trip to Napa last year. Back when things were simpler and she hadn't tried to legally protect herself from my supposed financial inadequacy. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever she wanted to say could wait until she'd calmed down enough to have an actual conversation instead of just yelling accusations into the void. The voicemail notification popped up within seconds. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I sent another text. I'm not doing the phone fight thing tonight. When you're ready to have an actual adult conversation about this, let me know. Until then, I'm going to finish my Chinese food and watch the game. Her response was a single word. Unbelievable. Right back at you, I typed. And then I did something that probably would have given my mother a heart attack if she'd known. I muted the conversation and turned my attention back to the basketball game that had been playing in the background. The Celtics were up by 12 and playing some genuinely beautiful ball. And honestly, that was a lot more interesting than Cassandra's existential crisis about dating someone who turned out to have more money than she did. But she wasn't done. Oh no. Over the next 2 hours, my phone lit up with notifications that I didn't read. Couldn't read because I'd muted them, but I could see the count increasing. By the time I decided to actually check what had happened, there were 17 more messages, each one apparently more dramatic than the last based on their increasing length. I unmuted the conversation and scrolled through the saga. It was like watching someone have a full breakdown via text message, starting with anger, moving through justification, taking a detour through self-righteousness, and eventually landing at a weird place that seemed to be part accusation, part self-pity, and part demand for validation. The highlights included, you know, I've worked hard for everything I have, which fair but irrelevant. My friends are going to ask questions now, which not my problem. Dalton said we need to completely redraft both prenups, which yeah, duh. And finally, I don't even know who you are anymore, which was particularly hilarious because I was exactly the same person I'd always been. She just finally knew my bank balance. I responded to all 17 messages with one simple text. I'm the same guy who fixed your laptop when you spilled coffee on it. Who listened to you talk about quarterly earnings for 3 hours straight, who supported your IPO dreams, and who never once made you feel bad about making more money than me, or so you thought. The only thing that's changed is your perception. Maybe sit with that for a while. Her response came 30 seconds later. This isn't over. Probably not. I agreed, but it's over for tonight. Get some sleep, Cass. You've got that board meeting tomorrow, and you're going to need to be sharp. I didn't wait for her response. I plugged my phone in across the room, a trick I'd learned from a self-help article about digital boundaries, and settled back into my couch cushions. Chairman Meow had forgiven me for the earlier disruption and was now sprawled across my lap like a furry judgmental blanket. The thing about Cassandra's meltdown was that it wasn't really about me hiding money or even about the prenup. It was about control, about narrative, about her carefully constructed image of our relationship where she was the successful one and I was the supportive but ultimately lesser partner. I disrupted that story, flipped the script without warning. And now she was scrambling to rewrite the narrative in a way that made sense to her worldview. But here's what she didn't get. What she probably would never get. I didn't care about being the richest person in the relationship. I didn't need to be the provider or the alpha earner or whatever corporate buzzword she wanted to use. I was perfectly happy being equals or letting her think she was ahead or whatever dynamic made her feel good about herself. The problem wasn't that I had money. It was that she'd wanted a prenup specifically to protect herself from me. Had basically declared that I was a financial liability she needed legal protection from and then got mad when it turned out I wasn't what she'd assumed. That's not my character flaw. That's hers. I fell asleep on the couch that night with the game still playing quietly in the background and my phone blessedly silent across the room. Tomorrow would probably bring more drama, more accusations, more attempts to make me the villain in a story where I'd literally done nothing wrong except be successful while dressing like I shopped at Target. But tonight I was just a guy with good Chinese food, a judgmental cat, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best move in chess is the one your opponent never sees coming. The invitation to Cassandra's apartment came the next evening via text, which was interesting because she'd spent most of the day giving me the silent treatment. Or at least I assumed she had, since my phone had been blissfully quiet except for work emails and a reminder from my dentist about an upcoming cleaning. The text was formal, almost businesslike. Can you come over tonight at 7 o'clock? We need to talk. Some of my friends will be here, too. That last sentence should have been my first red flag, maybe my second and third, too. But I was curious enough about what kind of ambush she was planning that I agreed. I showed up exactly on time because punctuality is my superpower. Wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that I'd ironed myself because I'm a functional adult who owns an iron, even if I only use it maybe 4 times a year. The building doorman knew me by now and waved me through with a knowing look that suggested he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. I took the elevator up to the 15th floor, listening to smooth jazz that was supposed to be calming, but really just made me think about dental offices and corporate lobbies. Cassandra opened the door before I could knock, which meant she'd probably been watching the elevator camera feed like a hawk. She was wearing casual clothes. Well, her version of casual, which meant designer yoga pants that probably cost $300, and a silk blouse that looked effortless, but definitely wasn't. Her hair was down, which was unusual for her, and she wasn't wearing the full makeup armor she usually had on. For a moment, I almost felt bad about the whole situation. Almost. Marcus, she said, and her tone was neutral, carefully controlled, like she'd been practicing in the mirror. Thanks for coming. Everyone's in the living room. Everyone turned out to be 3 of her closest friends. The corporate wolf pack she ran with, all successful women in their 30s who wore ambition like perfume and treated brunch like a strategic planning session. There was Tina, her PR manager, a sharp-featured blonde who could spin a company scandal into a feel-good story before you finished your morning coffee. Jessica, her college roommate turned venture capitalist who evaluated people the way normal people evaluated restaurant menus, quickly and with definite opinions about value. And Rebecca, her former boss turned business partner, a woman who'd made her first million before 30 and never let anyone forget it. They were arranged in Cassandra's living room like a tribunal, sitting on her expensive minimalist furniture with glasses of wine that probably cost more per bottle than my monthly utility bill. The whole scene had the vibe of an intervention, except instead of concerned family members worried about substance abuse, it was corporate warriors concerned about what exactly their friend dating someone who turned out to have money. The logic was already breaking down. Marcus, said Tina, and she didn't stand up or offer a handshake, just acknowledged my existence with the kind of cool assessment that PR people perfect over years of managing crisis. We're worried. We wanted to talk to you about the situation with Cassandra. I looked at Cassandra, who was suddenly very interested in her wine glass, then back at Tina. The situation, I repeated slowly, like I was trying out a new vocabulary word. You mean the situation where I have money and didn't announce it on a billboard? That situation? Jessica leaned forward, her venture capitalist brain clearly running some kind of calculation. It's not about the money, Marcus. It's about transparency. Relationships require honesty, and you weren't honest about your financial position. I pulled out one of Cassandra's dining chairs. A sleek, uncomfortable piece of designer furniture that looked great but felt like sitting on a slightly padded board, and sat down facing them. Okay, let's do this properly then. What specifically was I dishonest about? And I want actual examples, not vague feelings. Rebecca jumped in. Clearly the designated attack dog of the group. You let Cassandra believe you were just a regular consultant. You drove a beat-up car, lived in a modest apartment, never mentioned having significant assets. That's deceptive by omission. Cool, I said, nodding like I was really considering her point. So, by that logic, should I have also told her my childhood fears, my medical history, and my browser search history on the first date? Where exactly is the line between privacy and deception? Because from where I'm sitting, I answered every question I was asked. Honestly, I just didn't volunteer information that wasn't requested. That's not the same thing, Tina interjected, her PR instincts kicking in. Financial disclosure is fundamental to building a life partnership. You had to know that information was relevant. I smiled, and I could feel it wasn't a particularly nice smile. You know what's really interesting about this conversation? 3 months ago, Cassandra told me, and I quote, "I love that you're not intimidated by my success. So many men have fragile egos about dating a woman who makes more money." She literally praised me for being comfortable in what she thought was a lesser financial position. So, which is it? Should I have been insecure about her making more, or should I have announced I actually made more? Because I can't win both ways. The room went quiet for a beat. Cassandra was staring at her wine like it might contain the answers to life's mysteries if she looked hard enough. Her friends exchanged glances, that silent communication thing that groups of women do when they're recalibrating their strategy mid-con conversation. The point is, Rebecca tried again, clearly not ready to give up. You made Cassandra look like a fool. She brought her lawyer financial disclosures thinking she was the primary earner and you blindsided her with your actual net worth. That's humiliating. Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, I said. And my tone was still conversational, but there was an edge to it. Now, I didn't make Cassandra look like anything. She made assumptions based on superficial observations. My car, my apartment, my clothes, and those assumptions turned out to be wrong. That's not me humiliating her. That's her humiliating herself by judging a book by its cover, and then being surprised when the book had more pages than she expected. You could have corrected those assumptions, Jessica pointed out, playing the reasonable card. Why? I asked genuinely. Why was it my job to correct her assumptions? When someone assumes I'm younger than I am or taller than I am or from a different state than I'm actually from, I don't feel obligated to immediately correct them unless it's relevant. My bank balance wasn't relevant to our relationship until she made it relevant by demanding a prenup specifically designed to protect her money from me. Tina set down her wine glass with a deliberate clink. You don't understand the pressure she's under, Marcus. She's a CEO now. She has a public image to maintain, shareholders to answer to, a reputation in the tech community, having her personal life become fodder for gossip because her fiancé turned out to be secretly wealthy. Wait, I interrupted, holding up my hand. Let me get this straight. You're mad at me because I have money, but you're framing it as concern about gossip. If I was actually broke like she thought, would there be gossip? No. If I was wealthy and flashy about it from the start, would there be gossip? Maybe, but it would be different gossip. The only reason there's any potential for gossip is because Cassandra made a very public assumption about our financial dynamic and got it wrong. That's on her. You're being deliberately obtuse, Rebecca said. And there was real anger in her voice now. You know that appearances matter in our world. You know that Cassandra's carefully built a brand around being a strong, independent, successful woman. You undermining that. I didn't undermine anything, I said, and my voice got a little louder. Despite my best efforts to stay calm, I literally supported every single thing she did. I cheered her on through her IPO. I listened to her talk about business strategy for hours. I never once made her feel small or inadequate or less successful. The only thing I didn't do was announce my net worth. And the only reason that's a problem now is because she wanted to legally protect herself from me like I was some kind of financial threat. You want to know what's really wild? I was one of the early investors in her company. My money literally helped build the foundation of her success and she had no idea. That landed like a bomb in the middle of the room. All four women froze, wine glasses suspended mid-air, faces registering shock in varying degrees. Cassandra's face went from pale to red so fast I worried about her blood pressure. What? Cassandra whispered, and her voice was barely audible. Yeah, I said, leaning back in the uncomfortable designer chair. 3 years ago, when you were looking for seed funding and nobody was biting because your pitch deck was rough and you didn't have a prototype yet, remember that anonymous investor who came through with $50,000? The one your original partner said was a friend of a friend who believed in the vision. That was me. I believed in you, Cassandra. I believed in your idea and your drive and your potential. I gave you money, my money, to help you build your dream. And I never told you because I didn't want it to change anything between us. Jessica had her phone out now, probably already looking up public investment records. Tina looked like she was mentally composing a PR statement. Rebecca just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. And Cassandra looked like she might actually cry, which would have been satisfying if it wasn't also kind of sad. So, let me ask you all a question. I continued standing up because sitting in that terrible chair was making my back hurt. If you know your friend's entire company started with money from a guy she's now trying to pin up into financial irrelevance, who exactly looks foolish in this scenario? Because from where I'm standing, it's not me. I walked to the door, done with this circus, done with being interrogated by a committee of people who apparently thought having money while dressing like a normal person was some kind of moral failing. I turned back at the doorway, looking at Cassandra directly. You know what the funny thing is, Cass? I would have signed your prenup. Any version of it. I would have agreed to protect your assets, keep finances separate, whatever made you feel secure. But you didn't want a prenup for practical reasons. You wanted one to establish dominance to make sure I knew my place in our financial hierarchy. And when it turned out there was no hierarchy, you couldn't handle it. That's not my fault. That's yours. Nobody said anything as I left. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. The smooth jazz now sounding less like dental office music and more like the soundtrack to a relationship that was definitely over. The doorman gave me a sympathetic nod as I walked through the lobby, and I wondered how many similar scenes he'd witnessed in this building full of successful, complicated people with successful, complicated relationships. My phone buzzed before I even made it to my car. Gina, I'm hearing rumors about tonight through the legal gossip mail. You okay, Define? Okay, I texted back. Fair point. Drinks tomorrow. You can tell me everything and I'll tell you how we're going to make her lawyers cry. I smiled despite everything. Deal. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, which seemed to be the magic number for dramatic situations in my life lately. 14 were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters or nosy people who'd somehow gotten wind of the tech CEO's fiancé drama. 2 were from my actual mother asking if I was eating enough vegetables. And 1 was from a number I did recognize and had been dreading. Vivian Reeves, Cassandra's mother. The original corporate warrior princess who'd apparently given birth to a carbon copy of herself and then spent the next 30 years molding her into an even more intense version. I'd met Vivian exactly 4 times over the course of my relationship with Cassandra. And each encounter had been like having tea with a very polite, very well-dressed shark who was constantly evaluating whether you were worth eating or just ignoring. She was one of those women who'd climbed the corporate ladder in the 80s when it was basically a vertical wall with broken glass at the top. And she had the battle scars and the attitude to prove it. She wore power suits like armor, spoke in perfectly constructed sentences that sounded like they'd been edited for publication, and had a handshake that could crush walnuts. I stared at her missed call for a solid minute, debating whether answering was worth the inevitable headache. Chairman Meow, who'd been sleeping on my chest and was not pleased about being disturbed by my morning phone-checking routine, meowed his disapproval and relocated to the other end of the bed. Smart cat. He knew trouble when he smelled it. The phone rang again. Same number. Vivian Reeves was not a woman who gave up easily, which I suppose is how you become a successful corporate executive and raise another successful corporate executive. I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail again, but something told me that would only make the eventual conversation worse. Might as well rip the band-aid off now. Hello, I answered, trying to sound like I hadn't just been debating whether to block her number. Marcus, her voice came through the phone crisp and sharp, like she was conducting a business call rather than addressing her daughter's fiancé. Not good morning, not how are you, just my name like an accusation. We need to talk about what you've done to my daughter. I sat up in bed, disturbing Chairman Meow further, who gave me a look that suggested our friendship was hanging by a thread. Good morning to you too, Mrs. Reeves. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How's the weather in Connecticut? There was a pause, the kind that happens when someone isn't used to being met with sarcasm and needs a moment to recalibrate. This is not a social call, Marcus. Cassandra called me last night extremely upset. She told me about your financial revelation. My financial revelation, I repeated, getting out of bed and shuffling toward the kitchen because if I was going to have this conversation, I needed coffee. Strong coffee? Possibly intravenous coffee. You mean the part where I turned out to have money? Yeah, that was quite a shock for everyone. Really threw a wrench in the whole narrative. Don't be flippant, Vivian snapped. And I could practically see her sitting in whatever pristine home office she probably had. Probably wearing a suit even though it was Saturday morning. You humiliated my daughter in front of her legal team. You made her look foolish. I started the coffee maker, a basic Mr. Coffee that I'd owned since college and that Cassandra had repeatedly suggested I upgrade and leaned against the counter. Mrs. Reeves, with all due respect, I didn't make Cassandra look anything. She made assumptions about my financial situation based on superficial observations, and those assumptions turned out to be incorrect. That's not humiliation I caused. That's reality she failed to investigate. You must understand the pressure she's under. Vivian continued, and her tone shifted slightly, becoming less accusatory and more explanatory, like she was trying to make me understand something fundamental about the universe. Cassandra has worked incredibly hard to build her company, to establish herself in a male-dominated industry, to prove that she's capable of competing at the highest levels. Image matters, Marcus. Perception matters. The story of her relationship, of being the primary breadwinner, of being strong and independent. Let me stop you right there. I interrupted, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one with a cartoon cat that said, I do what I want that my sister had given me as a joke gift 3 Christmases ago. Are you seriously telling me that Cassandra's feminist empowerment narrative requires me to actually be less successful than her? That her story of being strong and independent only works if I'm weak and dependent? Because if that's the case, that's not empowerment. That's just a different kind of hierarchy with her on top. Another pause. I could hear her breathing controlled and measured, probably counting to 10 the way executives do when they're managing their anger in professional settings. You're deliberately missing the point, she finally said. No, I think I'm hitting it dead center. I replied, taking a sip of coffee that was still too hot and burned my tongue, which felt appropriate for this conversation. The point is that Cassandra wanted to be seen as the successful one in this relationship, and I let her have that because I didn't care about the spotlight. But the moment she tried to legally codify that hierarchy with a prenup designed to protect her from me like I was some kind of financial threat, she opened the door to actual financial transparency. And now she's mad that the truth doesn't match her preferred narrative. That's not my problem to fix. It becomes your problem when it affects her career. Vivon shot back. Her board is already asking questions. Investors are curious about her judgment. If she can't accurately assess her own fiancé's financial position, what does that say about her business acumen? I laughed, actually laughed out loud, which probably wasn't the diplomatic response, but was definitely the honest one. Oh, so now it's my fault that her board is questioning her judgment. Maybe they should be questioning why she demanded a prenup without doing basic due diligence on her fiancé's finances. That seems like a pretty significant oversight for someone whose whole brand is being thorough and strategic. You should have let her feel like the provider, Vivon said. And there was something in her voice now that sounded almost desperate. You should have understood that she needed that role, that identity. Why couldn't you just let her have it? And there it was, the real issue, stripped of all the corporate speak and the concern about image and reputation. Cassandra's mother, the woman who built her own empire and raised her daughter to do the same, genuinely believed that Cassandra's success required someone else to be less successful, that her daughter's strength required someone else to be weak, that her achievement required someone else to be lesser. Ma'am, I said, and I tried to keep my voice level and respectful because despite everything, I didn't actually hate Vivon. I just fundamentally disagreed with her worldview. I let Cassandra pay for dinner exactly twice in our entire relationship. Both times she insisted. Both times she made a show of it. And both times I said, thank you, and moved on. I never fought her on it. Never made her feel bad about it. Never tried to assert my own financial dominance. I was perfectly happy letting her feel however she wanted to feel about money. But the moment she decided my financial position was a legal liability that needed protection against, she made it relevant. You can't demand financial transparency through a legal document and then get mad when that transparency reveals information you didn't expect. You're being unreasonable, Vivon said. But it sounded half-hearted now, like she was saying it out of obligation rather than conviction. I'm being honest, I corrected. There's a difference. She hung up without saying goodbye, which was probably the most honest thing either of us had done in the conversation. I stood in my kitchen in my pajama pants and old t-shirt, drinking mediocre coffee, and wondering how I'd ended up in a situation where having money and not announcing it was somehow a character flaw. My phone buzzed with a text from Gina. Please tell me you didn't answer Vivon's call. Of course, I did. I texted back. I live for chaos. You're an idiot, she replied. A wealthy idiot, but still an idiot. I'd barely finished my coffee when there was a knock at my door. Not a gentle knock, not an I'm here to borrow sugar and knock, but an aggressive, demanding knock that made Chairman Meow bolt from the bedroom like his tail was on fire. I looked through the peephole and saw exactly what I'd been afraid of seeing. Vivian Reeves in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, standing next to Cassandra, who looked like she'd gotten about 3 hours of sleep and had spent most of those crying. I briefly considered pretending I wasn't home, but my car was in its designated parking spot, and they'd probably already seen it. Also, I'd already answered Vivian's call, so playing hide-and-seek now seemed pointless. I opened the door, still in my pajamas, still holding my coffee mug with the cartoon cat. Still very much not prepared for whatever intervention this was about to be. Ladies, I said, blocking the doorway. This is unexpected. We need to talk, Vivon said, and it wasn't a request. May we come in? I looked at Cassandra, who couldn't quite meet my eyes, then back at Vivon, who was staring at me with the intensity of someone conducting a hostile takeover. Do I have a choice? I asked. You always have a choice, Marcus, Vivian said. But some choices are better than others. I stepped aside and let them in. Immediately, regretting every decision that had led to this moment. They entered my modest apartment like queens, surveying conquered territory, taking in my IKEA furniture and my basic kitchen appliances, and my general aesthetic of functional adult on a budget who secretly has millions in the bank. Vivian got straight to the point, standing in my living room like she was about to deliver a keynote speech. Marcus, appearances matter in Cassandra's world. They matter to her career, her reputation, her future success. What people think about her personal life directly impacts her professional opportunities. Surely you can understand that. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one with the worn cushion that had molded to my body over years of use. What I understand, I said slowly, is that you want me to pretend to be less successful than I am so your daughter can maintain a narrative that makes her feel powerful. And I'm saying, no, that's not, Cassandra started. But her mother held up a hand and she immediately stopped talking, which told me everything I needed to know about their relationship dynamic. Think of it as a partnership decision, Vivon continued, her tone shifting to the one she probably used in boardrooms when she was negotiating deals. For the good of Cassandra's career, for the stability of her public image, it would be beneficial if the financial disparity wasn't public knowledge. I looked at Cassandra. Is this really what you want? For me to hide who I am, what I've achieved, so you can keep pretending you're the only successful one in this relationship? She finally met my eyes. And for just a second, I saw something that might have been doubt or regret or maybe just exhaustion. But then Vivon shifted slightly and whatever I'd seen disappeared behind the corporate mask. I just want things to go back to normal, Cassandra said quietly. They can't, I replied. Because normal was based on incomplete information. This is the actual normal. The question is whether you can handle it. My neighbor from across the hall, Mr. Peterson, chose that moment to step out of his apartment for his morning jog, saw the scene through my open door, and actually clapped. Just started clapping like he'd been watching a performance and the finale had delivered. About damn time, someone told them. He called out cheerfully and then jogged off toward the stairs, leaving silence in his wake. Vivian's face was red. Cassandra looked mortified and I was sitting in my worn armchair in my pajamas, still holding my cartoon cat coffee mug, thinking that maybe Mr. Peterson had the right idea about everything. 2 days after the mother-daughter invasion of my apartment, Gina called me laughing so hard she could barely breathe. I was at my desk pretending to work on a consulting project, mostly just scrolling through basketball highlights and wondering if my relationship drama would ever end when her name flashed on my screen. You're going to absolutely love this. She gasped between laughs that sounded borderline hysterical. I just got an email from Dalton, her lawyer. You won't believe what they're proposing now. I leaned back in my chair, already grinning because anything that made Gina laugh this hard was guaranteed entertainment. Hit me with it. They want you to sign an NDA, she said, and then dissolved into more laughter about your own wealth. They want you to legally agree not to discuss your financial position publicly. I nearly dropped my phone. Wait, what? She wants me to sign a non-disclosure agreement about having money. Exactly. Gina was clearly having the time of her life to protect her image as the breadwinner. They're literally asking you to shut up about being rich so she can keep pretending she's the only successful one. We didn't make it to the wedding, which honestly surprised nobody who'd been paying attention to the dumpster fire our relationship had become. Cassandra ended things via a carefully crafted email that her PR team had obviously edited, full of phrases like incompatible life goals and divergent values that really just meant you had the audacity to be richer than me. She told everyone I'd pretended to be broke to manipulate her, which was hilarious considering I'd never once claimed to be broke. Her PR team pushed that story hard, painting me as some kind of con artist who deceived their poor, innocent CEO. The narrative spread through tech circles faster than a software bug. And for about a week, I was apparently the villain in someone else's story. Then a journalist did actual research. Crazy concept, I know, and found the public filing showing I was a major investor in Cassandra's company's early funding round. The same company she'd just taken public. The empire she'd built had literally started with my money. When that story broke, her company's stock dipped 11% in one day. Months later, life was genuinely good. My royalties kept rolling in like clockwork, padding my bank account while I continued my deliberately average lifestyle. I finally upgraded from my beat-up SUV, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because the muffler had started sounding like a dying donkey having an existential crisis, and even I have limits. Then I met Amelia at a coffee shop, an elementary school teacher who thought liquid assets meant the water fountain in her classroom. And portfolio diversification sounded like something from a sci-fi movie. Over coffee that cost $3 instead of $12, I told her the whole Cassandra saga. She laughed until tears streamed down her face. Imagine needing a legal team just to love someone, she said, wiping her eyes. I grinned. Yeah, it's a very niche form of romance. Not recommended. Looking back, Cassandra didn't break my heart. She audited it. She wanted legal protection from me, but I was the one who needed protection from her pride and her need to be superior. Now I know when someone says it's not about the money, it's always about the money. And honestly, I've never been happier signing nothing.